Some stories should never be told. Some secrets should never be revealed. But tonight I will take you on a journey into the heart of a terrifying mystery that still haunts the inhabitants of a village, lost in the mountains. Prepare to discover why some fogs never really dissipate, and why sometimes it's better not to try to understand what hides behind the veil of mist. The village of Saint-Morgane-des-Brumes stands like a forgotten sentinel in the hollow of a narrow valley where the mountains seem to close in on themselves like a millennial stone trap. The gray stone houses cling to the steep slopes like ancient scars, their slate roofs gleaming under the perpetual rain that has rocked this region for centuries. Here, time seems to have stopped somewhere between the Middle Ages and an era that no one could really define, where secular traditions continue to govern daily life with implacable rigor. The inhabitants is no more than 200 souls counting. Newborns and elders live according to a mysterious calendar that obeys rules only the oldest still know. They speak in low voices in the cobbled alleys, exchange knowing glances when the cold season approaches, and all, without exception, respect a tradition dating back to the dawn of time. Each autumn, when the leaves begin to turn red and the air becomes charged with icy humidity, they know they must prepare for the arrival of the fog. It's not just any fog that envelops Saint-Morgane-des-Brumes at this time of year. It's a living, vaporous mass that descends from the heights like a hungry animal, dense and opaque to the point that one can no longer distinguish their own hand extended in front of them. It always arrives the same week, the one following St. Michael's Day, and persists for exactly 21 days. No more, no less, before withdrawing as mysteriously as it came. During these 3 cursed weeks, the inhabitants of Saint-Morgane-des-Brumes transform into voluntary recluses. The shutters close with a sinister bang that echoes in the deserted streets. Doors are barricaded with multiple locks, and not a soul ventures outside, even for the most urgent tasks. Provisions accumulate in cellars for months. Water reserves fill to the brim. Everyone locks themselves at home, waiting for this annual curse to pass. The oldest in the village tell to whoever wants to listen that this tradition dates back more than for centuries, when their ancestors learned at their expense what was hiding in the wisps of this particular fog. They speak of an era when people didn't yet know the sacred rule, when some still dared to go out of curiosity or necessity during these cursed days. But those who defied the ban never came back quite the same. When they came back, Marie-Claire Dubois, the village elder, at 92 years old, still keeps in memory the stories of her grandmother, who had herself witnessed unexplained disappearances. At the beginning of the last century, she tells, with her wavering but firm voice, how her own grandfather had tried to brave the fog to treat a sick cow in the stable. He was found 3 days later, wandering in the woods, completely amnesiac, endlessly repeating words in a language no one recognized. The local legends evoke ancestral creatures that would inhabit the autumn fogs, entities neither quite dead nor truly alive that constantly seek to attract the living to their kingdom of vapor and oblivion. Some speak of the lost children of a bygone era, souls of innocence who would have perished in some forgotten catastrophe and who would return each year, seeking company among the living. Others whisper that it's an ancestral curse cast on the valley by a witch wrongly accused and burned alive in the village square centuries ago. No matter which version one chooses to believe, one thing remains certain in everyone's mind: the fog is not natural, and it's better not to mess with it. This popular wisdom is passed down from generation to generation with remarkable consistency, and even the youngest, though tempted by modernity and skepticism, end up respecting family tradition. It's in this context that the Moreau family arrives. In Saint-Morgane-des-Brumes on a September morning when the first cold begins to bite the morning air, Thomas Moreau, a 30-year-old Parisian computer scientist, decided to radically change his life after a burnout that left him exhausted and disillusioned with the frantic pace of the capital. His wife Isabelle, a 35-year-old literature teacher, shares his desire to return to roots and for a more authentic existence, far from pollution and urban stress. Their daughter Emma, 8 years old, welcomes this change with the natural curiosity of childhood, excited at the idea of discovering country life and finally being able to have a real garden to play in. She is a lively and intelligent little girl with curly chestnut hair and green eyes sparkling with mischief, who constantly asks questions about everything around her. Her adventurous and intrepid character delights her parents, even if it sometimes gives them cold sweats. When she disappears to explore every nook and cranny of their new environment, the house they bought is located on the edge of the village, an 18th century building in cut stone that has kept all its rustic character despite some modern amenities. It has a large garden that extends to the forest edge, offering a breathtaking view of the surrounding mountains in the valley below. The spacious rooms with exposed beams breathe authenticity and calm, exactly what the Moreau family was looking for their new rural life. Asterisk, the first days unfold in the euphoria of discovery and the excitement of settling in. Emma runs everywhere, exploring every corner of the property, discovering with wonder the mysteries of the countryside, wild animal tracks in the mud, bird nests hidden in hedges, insects she had never seen in the city. Thomas and Isabel bustle about arranging their new home, savoring the silence and tranquility that contrasts so pleasantly with the Parisian racket they left behind. The first contacts with the village inhabitants prove rather warm, even if a certain mountain reserve is felt in social relations. Shopkeepers welcome them politely. The closest neighbors come to introduce themselves with the traditional bottle of local wine. And even the mayor, Monsieur Chabral, pays them a courtesy visit to welcome them. However, the Moreau family quickly notices that certain subjects seem taboo in conversations, as if there were unspoken things that no one dares to address openly. It's during a visit to the village grocery store, run by Madame Gerard, a round and welcoming woman in her 50s, that Isabel first hears about the autumn fog while buying provisions for the week. She innocently mentions that she's looking forward to seeing the autumn colors in the mountain and immediately notices the change in her interlocutor's expression. Madame Gerard's jovial face immediately closes, and she throws a worried look toward the door, as if she feared being heard by indiscreet ears. She explains in a low voice that there are certain local particularities that it's better to know when settling in the region, and that autumn can sometimes reserve surprises for newcomers. Without going into details, she advises Isabel to ask for clarification from the village elders, who will know how to explain the traditions to respect during this time of year. Madame Gerard ends the conversation by warmly recommending that the family make important provisions before the end of September. It sometimes happens that one cannot leave home for several days in a row. Intrigued by these mysterious allusions, Isabel talks about it that same evening to Thomas, who shrugs while evoking rural superstitions that must be taken philosophically. As a man of science and reason, he hardly believes in local legends and supposes it's simply precautions related to autumn bad weather or supply difficulties in case of prolonged bad weather. Nevertheless, out of prudence and not to offend their new neighbors, he accepts the idea of constituting larger reserves than usual. Emma, who overheard part of the conversation, asks 1,000 questions to her parents about these village mysteries that pique her child's curiosity. Why make provisions? What could prevent going out for several days? Are there dangerous animals in the forest in autumn? Her parents try to answer reassuringly, evoking the whims of mountain weather and the necessity of protecting against power outages or roads blocked by early snow. Days pass quietly, punctuated by arrangement work and daily discoveries of their new environment. Emma quickly made a friend in Julie, the neighbor's daughter, a blonde little girl her age with whom she shares her exploratory adventures in the garden and around the property. The two little girls spend hours building tree houses, observing squirrels and inventing fantastic stories inspired by the wild beauty of the surrounding nature. It's Julie who first evokes the existence of the special fog by explaining to Emma that one must never go out when the mist becomes too thick in autumn. According to the little girl's explanations, faithfully reporting her parents' warnings, the fog can sometimes make people sick are confused. And that's why everyone stays home waiting for it to pass. Emma listens to these revelations with fascination, her child's imagination immediately transforming these reasonable precautions into mysterious adventure full of exciting dangers. Thomas, for his part, begins to integrate into the village's social life, by participating in the local Newcomers Association activities. It's there that he meets Pierre Castellan, a former engineer who settled in the region 10 years ago and who gives him his veteran advice for adapting to mountain life. Pierre confirms the existence of particular meteorological phenomena in autumn, evoking exceptionally dense fogs that can persist for entire weeks. According to Pierre, these persistent fogs are linked to the valley's particular configuration, which forms a sort of basin where humidity accumulates and stagnates, creating very specific atmospheric conditions. He explains that the village elders have developed an excessive prudence toward these phenomena, transforming reasonable meteorological precaution into veritable superstitious ritual. Nevertheless, he advises Thomas to respect local customs, if only out of courtesy toward their new neighbors, and to avoid passing for arrogant city dwellers, despise popular wisdom. If you've been following this channel for a long time, you know that we explore together the most troubling mysteries and the most terrifying stories. So don't hesitate to subscribe and activate the notification bell to not miss any of our supernatural investigations, because each subscriber gives more strength to our community and allows us to continue offering you quality content. Also, don't forget to check the link in the description to participate in our exclusive contests that might allow you to win exceptional prizes related to the world of mystery and the occult. The first half of September flows peacefully in a routine that fully satisfies the Moreau family. Thomas works from his office arranged in the old barn, enjoying the correct internet connection and the absolute calm that favors his concentration and productivity. Isabel prepares Emma's school return while exploring the municipal library resources. She discovers a rich collection of works on history and regional traditions that fascinate her literary soul. Emma lives her last vacation, days with childhood carefreeness, multiplying discoveries in her new playground. She has established her secret headquarters in a large oak at the bottom of the garden, from where she can observe wild animals' comings and goings while keeping an eye on the family house. The little girl has developed a real passion for nature that delights her parents, used to seeing her glued to screens in their former Parisian apartment. It's around September 20th that the first warning signs of the annual phenomenon begin to manifest in the inhabitants' behavior. Conversations change tone in shops and public places. A muted but perceptible tension settles in the village atmosphere. People speak less loudly, look more often toward the sky, and many seem hurried to finish their current affairs to return home earlier than usual. Madame Gerard multiplies insistent recommendations among her clientele, suggesting to each one to make important purchases for the coming weeks. She evokes particularly unfavorable weather forecasts, risks of prolonged power outages, and the necessity of protecting against supply difficulties that regularly occur at this time. Isabel notices that the grocer seems strangely nervous, and that she carefully avoids meeting her gaze when evoking these precautions. Thomas also observes changes in Pierre Castellan's attitude, usually so relaxed and talkative during their friendly meetings. His new friend shows himself more distant and preoccupied, responding evasively to questions about activities planned for October and seeming to avoid subjects concerning the near future. When Thomas suggests programming a mountain hike for the first week of October, Pierre declines the invitation with unusual eagerness, claiming urgent family obligations. Julie's behavior also changes notably, the little girl becoming more taciturn and worried in her games with Emma. She now avoids moving away from the house and categorically refuses to play in the part of the garden that touches the forest, whereas it was her favorite place the previous week. When Emma asks her the reason for this change, Julie only responds that her parents have forbidden her to venture too far because the dangerous season is approaching. Emma reports these strange behavior modifications to her parents, who themselves begin to question the exact nature of the local traditions that everyone talks about in veiled terms. Isabel tries to obtain more precise information by consulting the municipal library works, but she notes with surprise that most local history books carefully avoid evoking the autumn particularities of the village. Only a few enigmatic passages allude to periods of spiritual retreat or seasonal meditation traditions, without ever going into details. Thomas decides to directly question the mayor, Monsieur Chabrol, during a chance encounter in the village square. The elected official, a 60-year-old man with a face weathered by mountain years, welcomes the questions with manifest embarrassment and first tries to elude the subject by evoking rural superstitions of no importance. However, faced with Thomas's polite but firm insistence, he finally admits that there are indeed particular meteorological phenomena that require certain precautions from inhabitants. Monsieur Chabrol explains that each autumn, this valley experiences exceptionally dense fog, episodes that can persist for several weeks. These impenetrable fogs make any exterior circulation extremely dangerous, even impossible, as visibility becomes null and risks of falls or accidents multiply. The local tradition therefore consists of locking oneself at home during these periods. Waiting for meteorological conditions to become normal again? The mayor insists that it's a perfectly rational precaution against the real dangers these fogs represent, and not some irrational superstition. He mentions several serious accidents that occurred in the past to people who had tried to brave these extreme climatic conditions, thus justifying the excessive prudence adopted by the village community. Nevertheless, Thomas perceives in his explanations a tension suggesting that the complete story is not entirely revealed. The mayor ends the interview by strongly recommending that the Moreau family respect this tradition, if only as a measure of elementary safety. He advises them to constitute important food reserves and to check their heating system's proper functioning, as these episodes of persistent fog are generally accompanied by particularly low temperatures. Finally, he asks them to keep their shutters closed during the entire phenomenon duration, officially to prevent humidity from penetrating the house and damaging interior installations. Thomas and Isabel return home with more questions than answers, but nevertheless decide to follow the mayor's advice out of prudence. They organize a great shopping session in the valley stores, constituting reserves of food, candles, batteries, and fuel for the fireplace. Emma participates enthusiastically in these preparations, seeing it as a sort of survival game exciting, that transforms their house into a veritable, autonomous fortress. The last days of September flow in an increasingly tense atmosphere, as if the entire village held its breath waiting for an inevitable event. The streets progressively empty, shops close earlier, and even the village children seem to have received orders not to play outside after 4 o'clock. Emma notices that Julie has completely disappeared from circulation, her parents having visibly decided to keep her constantly inside the family house. October 1st arrives with a metallic gray sky that seems to weigh on the entire valley like a lead lid. The air becomes abnormally still, without the slightest breath of wind, and an icy humidity gradually settles despite the day's still mild temperature. Even the birds seem to have deserted the region, leaving a heavy silence reign that puts the entire Moreau family's nerves on edge. Emma spends the day glued to windows, observing the subtle but worrying changes occurring in the familiar landscape. Colors appear dull and washed out, as if someone had lowered the environment's general brightness. Mountain contours become blurred and imprecise, giving the impression that reality itself begins to lose its sharpness and consistency. Thomas notices electronic disturbances in his computer equipment, his computer crashing several times for no apparent reason. Internet signal becomes capricious and intermittent, and even television reception degrades notably throughout the day. Isabel notes that her watch mysteriously stops around 5 o'clock, and that none of the house clocks seem to give the same time anymore toward the end of the afternoon. The first fog filaments begin to rise from landscape hollows like ghostly breathing. These vaporous wisps thicken rapidly, progressively gnawing at visibility and transforming the familiar world into a cottony and unreal universe. In the space of a few hours, the fog becomes so dense that it becomes impossible to distinguish the large oak at the bottom of the garden, yet located less than 50 meters from the house. The Moreau family conscientiously closes all shutters, as the mayor recommended, plunging their dwelling into artificial semi-darkness, lit only by electric lamps. The house atmosphere immediately changes, becoming more muffled and more intimate, but also more oppressive and more anxiety-inducing. Emma vigorously protests against this forced seclusion, deprives her of her exterior games and her daily naturalist observations. To distract their daughter and attenuate her feeling of confinement. Thomas and Isabel organize interior activities, board games, reading sessions, drawing and craft workshops. But Emma shows herself agitated and discontented, pacing around, the house like a caged animal and constantly demanding to be able to go outside. She doesn't understand why a simple fog necessitates such precautions, especially since she has already seen thick morning mists in Paris without it posing the slightest problem. The first night unfolds in unusual calm, no sound filtering from outside through the closed shutters. Usually, even in this quiet village, one always perceives some nocturnal sounds, the occasional passage of a car, wild animal cries, wind rustling in trees, but that night, it's a total silence that envelops the house. So deep that it becomes almost physically palpable and disturbing. Emma has trouble falling asleep in this confined atmosphere, constantly tossing in her bed and complaining of the stifling heat that reigns in her room, despite the exterior coolness. She ends up joining her parents in their bed, something she hadn't done for months. Seeking their comfort faced with this situation she feels as abnormal and threatening. Thomas and Isabel also spend a restless night, woken several times by oppression sensations and fleeting impressions of having heard inexplicable noises. The second day begins in grayish half-light that barely filters through shutter interstices, giving the impression that dawn never really arrived, and Thomas cautiously half opens a window to evaluate the situation. He discovers a fog wall so compact that he cannot even distinguish their house porch. The null visibility confirms the mayor's warnings and justifies a posteriori the precautions taken by all village inhabitants. Emma tolerates this imposed seclusion less and less and multiplies escape attempts, trying to discreetly open doors or windows to take a look outside. Each time her parents firmly bring her back inside, explaining the dangers of this unusual mist. But the little girl remains convinced they're exaggerating risks through parental excess of prudence. She begins to develop a real obsession for this mysterious fog, spending hours trying to pierce its secrets by observing density variations through poorly joined shutters. It's during the second night that Emma first hears the children's voices calling her from outside. She wakes up around 3 a.m. with the clear sensation that someone was pronouncing her name in the garden, and listens in her room's darkness. At first, she believes it's a persistent dream, or an effect of her imagination stimulated by the unusual situation. But the voices repeat with troubling regularity. They are children's voices, indeed gentle and friendly voices that invite her to come play outside despite the late hour and meteorological conditions. Emma sometimes recognizes familiar intonations, as if her former Parisian classmates or even her new friend Julie were calling her from the fog. The voices seem to come from different places in the garden, moving slowly around the house, as if their owners were walking in circles in the opaque mist. The little girl is first tempted to wake her parents to share her discovery with them. She fears they won't believe her or will attribute these voices to her child's imagination. She therefore decides to keep the secret and observe the phenomenon by herself. Discreetly getting up to press her ear against her room's shutters, the melodious calls continue for several hours, varying in intensity and origin, but always keeping this friendly and engaging tone that irresistibly attracts the little girl. The third day, Emma shows herself particularly distracted and dreamy, barely responding to her parents' questions and seeming to constantly listen to something no one else perceives. She spends long moments motionless near windows, head slightly inclined, as if she were listening for mysterious sounds that would reach her from outside. When Isabel asks what she's thinking about, Emma invariably responds that she's listening to her new friends, who tell her wonderful stories from the garden. Thomas and Isabel exchange worried glances, first supposing it's a normal child's reaction to confinement and boredom. Imaginary friends are not rare among children this age, especially in exceptional circumstances that stimulate imagination and creativity. However, they notice that their daughter seems to have precise conversations with these invisible entities, nodding, smiling, and even whispering responses in a low voice. Emma explains to her parents that her new friends are children like her, who live in the magical fog and who know lots of extraordinary games she has never practiced. They told her they live in a wonderful world where it's always warm, where candies grow on trees, and where adults are never angry or worried like ordinary. Grown-ups sometimes are. According to Emma's words, these mysterious friends constantly invite her to come join them to discover their fantastic universe and participate in their extraordinary adventures. Isabel tries to divert her daughter's attention by multiplying fun and educational activities, but Emma shows less and less interest in proposed distractions. The little girl prefers to stay near house openings, communicating silently with her invisible companions, who seem to exercise growing fascination over her. She even refuses to move away from windows to come eat, claiming she doesn't want to make her patient friends wait who are waiting for her outside with such kindness. Thomas begins to seriously worry about his daughter's behavior and decides to discreetly consult a medical site on his phone to learn about infant psychological disorders related to stress and isolation. He discovers that prolonged confinement can indeed provoke disorientation symptoms and hallucinatory episodes in young children, especially when they're deprived of their USUAL landmarks and normal social interactions. However, Emma's descriptions, precision, and her conversations constancy exceed the framework of classic psychological reactions. The third night, around midnight, Emma discreetly gets up from her bed and heads toward her room door with slow and mechanical gestures that strangely recall those of a sleepwalker who sleep poorly since the beginning of this forced seclusion. Hear the doors creaking and wake up immediately. They find their daughter standing in the hallway, eyes open but with an empty gaze turned toward the staircase leading to the ground floor. When they question her gently, Emma responds in a monotone voice that she must go join her friends who are waiting in the garden to show her hidden treasures they discovered especially for her. She explains that it's very important she goes now, because it's the ideal moment to visit their secret kingdom, and they cannot wait any longer. Thomas and Isabel firmly bring their daughter back to her room, but she protests by repeating that she promised her friends to come and cannot hurt their feelings by breaking her word. The next morning, Emma wakes up with no memory of her nocturnal episode, but she seems even more obsessed with her invisible friends than the previous days. She spends all her free time discussing with them through the shutters, telling them about her former life, her favorite games, and her adventure dreams. Sometimes she bursts into laughter in reaction to inaudible jokes, or she nods gravely, as if listening to important revelations. Thomas decides to try a direct approach and asks Emma to introduce him to her new friends, hoping either to dispel this illusion or understand what's really happening. The little girl accepts enthusiastically and brings him near the living room window, where she begins talking into the void, presenting her father to her invisible companions. She explains that Julie is there, as well as Mark and Sophie, very nice children who live in the fog and who would very much like to meet the whole family. Thomas obviously perceives nothing but silence and fog opacity, but he notices that Emma seems to really hear responses to her words. She even translates her friends' greetings for her father's benefit, reporting that they're very happy to meet him and hope to soon be able to play with the whole family. According to Emma, her mysterious friends are eager to show adults the wonders of their world and share with them the secrets they've discovered in their mist universe. Isabel tries another approach by suggesting Emma draw her new friends to get to know them better. The little girl launches enthusiastically into this activity, but the drawings she produces are strangely troubling for an 8-year-old child's creations. She represents blurred silhouettes with imprecise contours, faces without defined features, and bodies that seem to merge into a vaporous and indistinct background. The colors used by Emma are exclusively shades of gray, white and pale blue, as if she couldn't conceive her friends otherwise than in this misty palette. When her parents ask why she doesn't put bright colors in her drawings, she responds that her friends don't have normal colors because they live in a world different from ours, where everything is softer and more blurred. She adds that it's precisely for this reason that their universe is so restful and beautiful. Far from the harshness and brutality of the adult world, the 5th day of their confinement, Emma's psychological state degrades markedly. The little girl becoming increasingly detached from family reality to concentrate exclusively on her mysterious interactions. She categorically refuses to move, away from windows, claiming her friends need her constant presence and she cannot abandon them. When her parents insist she participate in family activities, she enters violent tantrums, quite unusual for this normally gentle and obedient child. Emma also begins to refuse eating, explaining that her fog friends bring her special food that sustains her perfectly and tastes much better than ordinary food. She claims to smell delicious odors coming from outside: honey candies, cinnamon cakes, exotic fruit she's never tasted but whose taste she mysteriously knows. Thomas and Isabel are alarmed to see their daughter visibly lose weight in a few days, her face becoming paler and her eyes hollowing in their sockets. The fifth night, Emma makes a new escape attempt, but this time consciously and with worrying determination. Around 2 in the morning, she gets up silently and heads toward the front door, which she begins to methodically unlock despite the multiple locks installed by Prudence. Fortunately, the bolt's noise wakes Thomas, who discovers his daughter about to go out into the nocturnal fog wearing only her TGOWN when he asks what she's doing. Emma calmly responds that she has an appointment with her friends who are waiting to show her their cloud castle located somewhere in the forest. She explains it's an exceptional chance they're offering her, as very few children have the privilege of discovering this magical place, where all their dreams can become reality. Thomas firmly brings his daughter back inside, but she continues to protest, repeating that her friends will be very disappointed and she might never have another opportunity to visit their wonderful world. Isabel and Thomas spend the rest of the night taking turns watching their daughter, who now seems totally obsessed with the idea of joining her mysterious companions outside. Emma no longer finds sleep and stays awake discussing with her invisible friends, explaining to them that her parents prevent her from going out through meanness and jealousy, because they can't stand that she found friends more interesting than them. She promises them she'll soon find a way to escape them, to join them definitively in their missed paradise. The 6th day, Thomas decides to contact Pierre Castellan, despite the tacit prohibition from going out, hoping to obtain advice from his more experienced neighbor. He manages to reach Pierre by phone, but notes that his interlocutor seems extremely nervous and reluctant to talk about the situation. Pierre explains in a low voice that some children are more sensitive than others to phenomena accompanying autumn fogs, and that Emma must absolutely be prevented from going out whatever happens. According to Pierre, Saint-Morgane-des-Brumes fogs have particular properties that can affect children's nervous system and provoke very realistic auditory and visual hallucinations. He explains that some village kids have already been victims of these phenomena in the past, developing obsessive fixations on imaginary presences they believe they perceive in the mist. The only solution consists of keeping the child inside until the fog dissipates, hoping symptoms will disappear with it. Pierre adds, in a particularly grave tone, that several families have already lived terrible dramas because of these phenomena, children having managed to escape during the night, to disappear definitively in the mist. He mentions the case of little Marie Dubois, the village elder's grandniece, who had disappeared 15 years ago in similar circumstances and was never found. Since this tragic event, all village parents take extreme precautions to ensure their children cannot go out during fog episodes. Thomas hangs up with certainty that the situation is much more serious than he imagined, and that local superstitions actually hide very concrete dangers for children's safety. He shares his conversation with Isabel, and both decide to redouble vigilance to prevent Emma from giving in to mysterious temptations that seem to irresistibly attract her outside. They install additional security devices on all house exits, chains, additional bolts, and even an improvised alarm that will trigger if a door opens during the night. Emma welcomes these security measures with a cold anger that contrasts with her usual frustrated child outbursts. She looks at her parents with new contempt, reproaching them for wickedly depriving her of her life's most beautiful adventures through selfishness and narrow-mindedness. According to her, they understand nothing about the wonders awaiting her outside because they're too old and too close-minded to appreciate the magic existing around them. The little girl even begins to threaten her parents with mysterious retaliations, explaining that her fog friends don't appreciate being prevented from joining her. She claims these entities have special powers, allowing them to enter closed houses and punish bad adults who harm children. Thomas and Isabel are deeply troubled by this radical personality change in their daughter, usually so affectionate and respectful toward them. The seventh day. Strange phenomena began to manifest in the house itself, as if Emma's friends were indeed seeking to penetrate their refuge. Inexplicable noises resonate in walls, creaking, cracking, and sometimes sounds resembling distant whispers or muffled children's laughter. House temperature becomes difficult to regulate, some rooms cooling brutally while others remain abnormally. Isabel notices that humidity seems to progressively infiltrate the house. Despite closed shutters and precautions taken against bad weather, condensation traces appear on walls, and an odor of wet earth and decomposing vegetation gradually invades all rooms. Emma welcomes these manifestations with obvious joy, explaining that her friends are finally beginning to find ways to enter. To see her, Thomas discovers with stupefaction that some of his belongings have moved inexplicably. Books stored in different shelves, clothes found in wardrobes that aren't theirs. Personal objects changed places without any family member remembering it. Isabel notes similar phenomena with her own belongings, and even with Emma's toys that seem to spontaneously reorganize according to a mysterious logic no one understands. These object movements are sometimes accompanied by wet traces on surfaces, as if invisible hands and wet ones had manipulated family belongings.